Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Tuesday, September 24th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
And Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
We will have a water cooler episode tomorrow, I promise. Our schedule is just so messed up. We have people at 3 different writers at 2 different festivals around the world. It's kind of throwing things into a little bit of a mess here at Slash Film headquarters. So we'll try to do our water cooler episode tomorrow, and even that will be without Jacob and Chris. So we'll get to it. But let's dive into the news. Yesterday, after we recorded some news, actually a bunch of different news bits from the Batman hit the web. Some casting. Ben, what do we know?
Yes, a new report says that Jeffrey Wright is in talks to play Commissioner Gordon in The Batman for director Matt Reeves. You may know Jeffrey Wright from his work in Westworld. He was also in Casino Royale. He plays Felix Leiter, the CIA agent who is a friend and cohort of James Bond, and he's actually going to be reprising that role very soon in the next James Bond film, No Time to Die. And this is kind of awesome casting, guys. I think because Wright, he's a really good he's really good at doing that, at being like an exposition machine and keeping things interesting. He's done stuff like that in like movies like Source Code and Westworld. It seems like all his character does is just, explain things or wander around wondering what the hell is going on. But the sidekick thing, the Felix Leiter James Bond thing, shows that he can do that too. He plays somebody with authority very well, and I think it's really exciting to think about the idea of Jeffrey Wright standing next to Robert Pattinson's Batman and talking on a roof or something. So I hopefully, he's one of those Jim Gordons in the movies that actually has a little bit more to do than just stand around on a rooftop talking, because I think Wright has proven that he can do that. But even if it's just, a small role, I think it's exciting stuff.
Yeah, no, well said. I'm wondering, is this the first time that Commissioner Gordon has been a person of color? I mean, because traditionally, it's a white person. Traditionally, Gotham is kind of a cesspool of, there's racists. It is kind of like, I guess based on olden day, like New York City. Do we know, has there, because it's interesting that Matt Reeves is, bringing a new look to Commissioner Gordon here.
Yeah, I'm rapidly looking this up right now to see if maybe the only one I can think of is maybe like somebody in I don't remember who played Commissioner Gordon in the Lego Batman movie. Oh, here it is. Hector Elizondo played Jim Gordon in the Lego Batman movie, and that's the only one that I could think of that would be like a non-white person. Maybe if listeners know of any others and any other incarnations of Batman across the years, feel free to let us know, because that's I would definitely want to know that.
And it does look like they were looking for a person of color for this role. Brad, you learned some stuff, right?
Yeah, so actually a while back, in an edition of Superhero Bits, we highlighted a little story that came from Jeff Snyder, who he always mentions little news tidbits on podcasts that aren't quite enough for like a scoop or a story or something like that. And he happened to mention that Mahershala Ali from Green Book and soon to be Marvel's Blade was actually offered the role of Commissioner Gordon, but he turned it down because he wanted to play Blade at Marvel.
Crazy. And also yesterday we got some other Batman casting news. This one in the villain department. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, just minutes after the Jeffrey Wright news came out, a separate report came out saying that Jonah Hill, the 2-time Oscar nominee, is also in talks to join the cast. There's been some, disagreement about who he's supposed to be playing. Apparently that disagreement actually extends to, him and his team and Warner Brothers, the studio that is making the Batman as well, because Hollywood Reporter said that Hill was in early talks to play either the Penguin or the Riddler in the new movie, although there was, they can't seem to agree on which person he should play, and there's a chance that they might not be able to come to an agreement and the whole thing could sort of fall apart. And then even after that, Collider reported that Hill was actually eyeing the role of the Riddler. So it seems like there's, it's definitely a shifting scenario right now. They don't know what I guess there's some back and forth about what Jonah Hill's rate should be in the movie. Apparently he's asking for something like $10 million, which is apparently more than double what Robert Pattinson is supposed to be making in the lead role. So we were talking in the Slack earlier, and Brad's like, well, Robert Pattinson hasn't been nominated for 2 Oscars, so maybe that has something to do with that. So it sounds like there's just a lot of negotiations going on behind the scenes, and I suspect we'll be hearing more about this very soon.
It sounds to me they want Jonah Hill to play Penguin, but knowing the physical transformation Jonah Hill has gone through the last few years, it seems like that's a role that he would not want to take. I'm wondering what you guys think. Should he be Riddler or the Penguin?
I would personally rather see him as the Riddler. It seems too easy to put him in the role of the Penguin, much in the same way that it seems kind of obvious to put Josh Gad in the role of the Penguin, which he was kind of messed with fans that he might be cast in the role and was really just joking around about it. And I think I would like to see him take on a role that doesn't require him to just be, a bigger guy playing a menacing person, but do something a little bit different. So that's what I'm about. Or I'd like to propose maybe that he plays a new villain that is a combination of the Penguin and the Riddler called the Piddler.
Ben, what do you think?
Well, I mean, it's really hard to top the Piddler, Peter, but I don't know. I feel like he would be a good Penguin as well, if that is indeed something that he's actually interested in doing. Even though, as you alluded to, Peter, he's sort of slimmed down in recent years, and he sort of like ping-pongs back and forth, based on the roles that he's playing and stuff like that. So I haven't seen a recent picture of him, so I don't know like what he looks like in this exact moment. But even if he's like a skinnier, slimmer version of the Penguin, I think that would be interesting. And I think he could pull off, that sort of rich socialite kind of thing. And depending on how modern an approach they want to take that, the movie itself is supposed to be sort of a throwback, like an old school noir detective kind of thing. But if it's set in modern day, it might be interesting to see, I don't know, like the Penguin as like a tech bro kind of guy, like somebody like that. And I could see Jonah Hill sort of playing that role to perfection. So I don't know. It's still so early in the process, and they're just getting started with this casting stuff, and we haven't really heard much about what exactly these characters are going to be like in this iteration of Batman.
I just can't imagine Jonah Hill like as a fast talking Riddler. Like Riddler traditionally like says these like really fast like quips and riddles and stuff like that. I mean, hence the name. And that does not seem like Jonah Hill at all. But I don't know. We'll have to see. I'm very interested in this movie. Matt Reeves, has done no wrong in my book, so I'm excited to see what he puts together with the Batman. But let's move on from DC to Marvel, and let's talk about how Disney, I guess, first of all, Bob Iger has a book coming out, and he's relayed a bunch of stories in this book that have become news, the first of which is that Disney almost bought Marvel Studios before 2009, but there was a reason why that didn't happen. Brad, what do we know?
Yes, for those who are interested, Bob Iger's new book is called The Ride of a Lifetime, Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company. It's out now, and like Peter said, there's these fun little stories coming out of it. And this one involves the opportunity that Disney was proposed by former Disney CEO Michael Eisner, who brought up the idea of acquiring Marvel characters before there was even really a Marvel Studios and before Iron Man had been released. Disney bought Marvel Studios in 2009 after the release of Iron Man, before the Marvel Cinematic Universe was even truly formed. But at the time, they were worried that this would, quote, tarnish the brand of Disney. And that's mostly because they were still very much focused on simply family-friendly entertainment, animated stuff, things like the characters that they already had. And so they just didn't really want to lean into that edgier territory. So in the book, Iger says, quote, when he's talking about the opportunity to buy Marvel again, he says, "This wasn't the first time Marvel has been on Disney's radar. Early in my time working for Michael, I attended a staff lunch in which he floated the idea of acquiring them. A handful of executives around the table objected. Marvel was too edgy, they said. It would tarnish the Disney brand. There was an assumption at the time internally and among members of the board that Disney was a single monolithic brand and all of our businesses existed beneath the Disney umbrella. I sensed Michael knew better, but any negative reaction to the brand or suggestion that it wasn't being managed well, he took personally." So say what you will about Michael Eisner. But that's some hell of a foresight that he had to say, hey, we need to get our hands on all these Marvel characters and do something with them because this could be a big deal. And it took Bob Iger stepping up to actually do something about it. And now look at where Disney and the Marvel Cinematic Universe is now.
Yeah. No, I mean, I know we've talked in the past on the podcast about alternate universes where other things had happened. Imagine if Disney had acquired Marvel in that time with Michael Eisner as the head. Like, what would Marvel look like today? Like, I feel like it would be a completely different Marvel. Like, there would be not the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we know it, and it would probably be a lot more PG. We probably wouldn't have gotten Tony Stark.
I'm actually not sure if it would have been more PG, because I do wonder, because Michael Eisner was also the guy who was behind Hollywood Pictures, who were the ones who did the more, R-rated fare and adult movies like Judge Dredd and The Rock and Nixon. And so I do wonder if maybe he had an idea of making that something that, was intentionally a little bit more edgy than what Disney had intended. And, expanding in the way that they have now, because now they have, this Marvel Studios that sure is family friendly, but it's not as family friendly as something like Disney's usual fare. And the same can be said about Star Wars too.
Yeah, that makes a good segue because, Disney bought Star Wars a few years later. Bob Iger in his book talks about how George Lucas got edged out of Star Wars with The Force Awakens. Ben, what did we learn?
Yeah, so Iger tells a story about how Disney purchased some of George Lucas's early outlines for the 3 new movies, and they, according to Iger, he says that Disney made it clear that they would not be contractually obligated to use any of Lucas's ideas, and it sounds like something may have gotten lost in translation because here's the quote from his book. He says, early on, Kathy Kennedy brought J.J. Abrams and Michael Art up to Northern California to meet with George at his ranch and talk about their ideas for the film. George immediately got upset as they began to describe the plot, and it dawned on him that we weren't using one of the stories he submitted during the negotiations. The truth was, they had discussed the direction in which the saga should go, and we all agreed that it wasn't what George had outlined. George knew we weren't contractually bound to anything, but he thought that our buying the story treatments was a tacit promise that we would follow them, and he was disappointed that his story was being discarded. So that's the quote there. And, we've heard stories like this before, some of them actually in George Lucas's own words, but it's just sort of interesting to hear Iger's perspective on the whole thing.
And there's even another bit in there of Iger describing George Lucas's first viewing of The Force Awakens.
Yeah. He says, just prior to the global release, Kathy screened The Force Awakens for George. He didn't hide his disappointment. There's nothing new, he said. In each of the films in the original trilogy, it was important to him to present new worlds, new stories, new characters, and new technologies. In this one, he said, there weren't enough visual or technical leaps forward. He wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't appreciating the pressure we were under to give ardent fans a film that felt quintessentially Star Wars. We'd intentionally created a world that was visually and tonally connected to the earlier films, not to stray too far from what people loved and expected, and George was criticizing us for the very thing we were trying to do. So that's a small portion of his quote there, and I think that's the big defense of The Force Awakens that every fan of that movie has, right? It's so obvious that they were trying to course correct from what had happened in the prequels and get people back into that magic of the original trilogy in terms of tone and visuals. And yes, they had to copy a lot of things to do that. But I think by introducing those new characters and making them so lovable and interesting from the start, that's the big defense, right? That Abrams, was boxed in, but he did the best with the circumstances that he had to make this movie under.
I just wonder, do you think we'll ever get a chance to see those treatments that George Lucas wrote? I feel like they could at least adapt those into a book or a comic book or something. There's something to be made of that. But then on the other hand, that you're as a company, Disney as a company is putting that out there, gives fans some bait to, be like, oh, they should have done George's version.
Right, it's like the Snyder Cut.
Yeah.
It's that same argument. I don't know. I feel like maybe after this trilogy, the Skywalker saga comes to an end, and maybe a few years after that, maybe once the Star Wars franchise has moved on into new trilogies and new stories and stuff, maybe, with enough time having passed for this trilogy to sort of maybe begin to cement its own legacy, maybe they would allow something like that. Brad, do you think that Disney would ever let that story be told in any way?
It feels unlikely, and pretty much for the same reasons that Peter said. I just can't imagine that they would release it simply because it would undermine what has been done, and you would just be emboldening the fans to be like, oh, this would be so much better. We should have let George Lucas do what he wanted to do.
I will say that, before Star Wars was sold to Disney, they did release a graphic novel version of the Star Wars, which was George Lucas's original treatment for Star Wars, original script, and it was done in the style of Ralph McQuarrie's original concept art. And I was so excited to get this thing because it was going to see what the first draft of Star Wars would have been envisioned as, and it was horrible. So it sits on my shelf. I've read it once. It is an interesting experiment. But that exists. So if that exists, maybe this could exist, is what I'm saying. But let's talk about, we were talking about Star Wars, The Force Awakens. And I remember when that movie was coming out, they did this big thing called Force Friday. And they've done that for every Star Wars movie since. But the hubbub around Force Friday doesn't seem to be as big nowadays. Today they announced they're doing a triple Force Friday. Brad, what do we know?
Well, we already knew Triple Force Friday was coming. It's happening on October 4th, and it's called Triple Force Friday because it will see the release of new merchandise for 3 different Star Wars properties. We will see the first merchandise for Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. We'll get merchandise for The Mandalorian, and also the new video game Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. And those latter 2 will be released in November, while Rise of Skywalker comes in December. And so it's always customary that there's a big toy release for the new toys and T-shirts and lunchboxes and everything before the new Star Wars movie, because a lot of that stuff hits shelves early, and it's kind of the first real good glimpse that we start getting at certain characters and learning more story details and ships and all that kind of stuff. So that happens on October 4th, but this week there'll be a sneak preview of a lot of the stuff that will be coming to shelves next week on September 26th. There'll be a live stream at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll have cast members from Rise of Skywalker, The Mandalorian, and the Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order video game, seeing some of their action figures and stuff for the first time. It'll be the first time fans get to see what they'll be able to buy next week so that you can kind of plan ahead and figure out, which toys and stuff you want to buy. Might even be a good way to plan for Christmas presents for your kids if you have Star Wars fans among your family. And I always love when they do this because every single time there's been a new Star Wars movie, with the exception of Solo, since I didn't really care as much then, I've gone to whatever store is open at midnight and bringing the toys out to get my hands on some of the Black Series figures and usually a few Funko Pops that come out.
Do you feel I remember that original Force Friday, I went to the stores and they were sold out of everything immediately. They did not stock enough of the Funko Pops. They didn't stock enough of the Black Series figures. Has it gotten better?
Yes and no. So for Last Jedi, it was definitely easier to get a hold of stuff, but it seemed like that they had less stuff ready, at least for the launch at the store that I went to. I went to when I went for Force Friday. They weren't quite prepared, or at least the store I went to, and it could have been just because I live in a less populated area that the store was like, whatever, we don't care. But I was still able to get everything I wanted, but it seemed like they didn't have maybe as big of a stockpile ready to go this time. And I'm not sure if that's just because of a drop in popularity, or if they're just kind of hedging their bets and seeing, what really sells well first, so they know what to make more of, so they're not stuck with a bunch of Constable Zuvio figures again.
Yeah. Do you think we're actually going to learn anything about the movie from these toy releases? Because, like you said, even with Force Awakens, they had that Constable Zuvio figure, and he is only in the film, I think someone said, for 3 frames in the background of a scene or something like that. I feel like, especially with JJ and his mystery box, we're just going to get the regular characters and, a Sith trooper.
Yeah, I think if we'll learn anything extra, it'll probably come from the books that will be released. But even then, a lot of the books that have sensitive information in them get held until much closer to the release of the movie, even just after the release of the movie. So I think we'll get a few details here and there, but I imagine they're playing this one even closer to the vest than they did the previous two movies.
For sure. And they always release a series of toys after the movie gets released, too, that are like a bit more spoilery. Is that correct?
Yeah. The waves that come out after the movie usually involve the characters that you were waiting to see until after the movie came out.
Speaking of JJ, speaking of toys, he was originally, I think, attached to do the Micronauts, and that movie has now found a new director in How to Train Your Dragon's Dean DeBlois. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, so the How to Train Your Dragon director is going to be writing and directing the live-action sci-fi movie Micronauts, which is based on the popular 1970s kids' toy that spawned a Marvel comic. I think actually in our interview with him earlier this year, Peter, he told you that he's basically spent a decade of his life making How to Train Your Dragon movies, and he said, I hope to do something live action at some point. And it sounds like this is it. He's making the Micronauts movie for Paramount. So this is a movie that's supposed to be in the Hasbro cinematic universe, which will connect with characters from G.I. Joe, Mask, and ROM. And man, strap in, guys, because I'm about to give you a description of Micronauts. I never played with these toys growing up, so I'm completely unfamiliar with this as like a piece of intellectual property. But this description sounds completely insane. So here we go. The Micronauts came from the small universe Microverse, which was full of strange planets like the human-inhabited homeworld, which is made up of diverse spherical habitats that are linked together in the fashion of a molecular chain. Are you still with me? I barely, like, even that first sentence, I'm like, wait, what? Okay.
As someone writing the synopsis, that seems like superfluous information that we don't need to know.
They're painting the picture of the larger Micronauts atmosphere. Okay. A resistance assembles in response to the threat posed by an immortal dictator known as Baron Karza, who gains control of the homeworld through the creation of the body banks, where life-extending brain transplants are performed on the rich and inhuman genetic alterations on the poor. So how any of this has to do, what any of this has to do with a goofy-looking toy series, I'm not sure, because that sounds like a really sort of like dark dystopian sci-fi premise, which is not really something that I would expect from the director of How to Train Your Dragon, which is a trilogy that's mostly like I would say soaring and light, and it deals with some heavy issues, but it certainly has a light touch. I'm not sure how you're going to be able to put a light touch on the Micronauts if that's the foundation on which this whole thing is built.
Well, they put a light touch on the Transformers franchise, Ben, so
I guess that's true with like Bumblebee. That had a little bit of a lighter tone than the sort of.
By the way, I was joking about them putting a lighter touch.
Well, I mean, they really did though, because Bumblebee was way lighter than like Age of Extinction or whatever those later Michael Bay ones were.
Okay, I also have not played with the Micronauts. Like, so do these characters exist at a small size in our world? Is that what it is?
I have no idea, Peter. I'm very curious to see how, because especially if they do, right? Like maybe they have like Ant-Man style technology or something where they're actually really tiny and they could use that technology to build up the world around them and make that visually interesting. But then how do those characters then interact with G.I. Joe and Mask and ROM and some of these other Hasbro characters later on down the line? I mean, that just seems... I don't know. It seems like they're getting ambitious over there in the Hasbro Cinematic Universe. That's for sure.
Brad, you're our resident toy fanatic. Do you know anything about the Micronauts?
No, not in the least. This sounds this sounds so weird and wacky to me, and I don't even know what's going on with that description or anything. It sounds totally nuts. Well,
I'll say this. I do like the How to Train Your Dragon movies, at least the first one and the last one. Maybe not the middle one so much, but they were all visually stunning, and I'm excited to see what Dean DeBlois can do in live action. But let's move on to our final story for today, and that is a bit of casting for a Will Smith movie. Brad, what do we know?
Will Smith is about to get dark. He has signed on to finally play a bad guy. The council is a new movie that Netflix is working on that will tell the true story of Nicky Barnes, who was the boss of a crime syndicate made up of 7 black men who ruled Harlem in the 1970s and 1980s, largely thanks to revolutionizing the drug trade by partnering with the Italian mafia. And this all unfolded in New York City during that time. And if the name Nicky Barnes sounds familiar, that's because that was the rival of Frank Lucas, who is the character that Denzel Washington played in American Gangster. So Will Smith will play Nicky Barnes. And make no mistake, this is not, some guy who was, a wrongfully convicted criminal or anything like that. This was a bad dude who led a crime syndicate that went to war with other, mobs and their bosses and did very bad things. So the script is coming from Peter Landesman, who wrote Concussion, which also starred Will Smith. There doesn't seem to be a director attached yet, so this is still in development over at Netflix, but I, for one, am excited simply because Will Smith has long held back from playing characters like this. He even famously turned down Django Unchained because he felt Django as a character was too vengeful and the movie would be too violent for him to be able to do and still have a good conscience about it. So seeing him take on a character like this, I think, is exciting to me because we've yet to see him really cut loose as far as being an angry, really just bad motherfucker. So I think this could be really cool to see.
But do you really think we're going to see that, or do you think we're going to see the less cut down version of that to satisfy Will Smith, who has been kind of reluctant to play a bad guy his entire career?
I mean, I don't know how you do that, because I'll tell you this. The New York Times described Nicky Barnes as, quote, the notorious de facto incarnation of Ron O'Neal in Gordon Parks Jr.'s 1972 film Superfly. They also describe him as the flamboyant dope peddler who flooded Harlem and other black neighborhoods with heroin, led cops on frivolous 100-mile-per-hour car chases, and redefined bling. So I don't think that you can play this character as being reserved or anything like that. And I think that this performance really should be along the lines of something like Denzel Washington's performance in American Gangster. And as Frank Lucas, he was tough and he was just, a ruthless guy.
Okay. That brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find the links to all the stories we talked about on today's podcast in the show notes. This podcast, Slash Film Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And please rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends. Spread the word. And we'll see you tomorrow.